Joint Committee on Administrative Rules will come to order. If you would like to testify on a rule set on the agenda today, please fill out a testimony card and turn it into a sergeant. Will the clerk please call the roll for today's attendance?
Chair Wozniak.
Here.
Representatives Johnson.
Here.
Wertz.
Here.
Farhat. Carter. Senators Waino. Bayer. McMorrow. Tice.
Here.
Runstad. Mr. Chair, you do not have a quorum.
All right. Well, we'll continue with hearing on the rule set, but we have 3 sets of minutes we're going to have to approve if we get a quorum sometime today. As a reminder to the committee members, any action by the JCAR committee shall be by concurring majorities of the members from each house. That means 3 representatives and 3 senators must vote in the affirmative on any motion for that motion to prevail. Today we'll be hearing testimony on JCAR Rule Set 2550. We will begin with Sydney Hart from the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and she has a couple of guests. Pardon? Sure.
Thank you. I just want to apologize to the folks that are coming forward. I have a conflicting meeting later on at 9:30, so I'll be leaving about 9:25, and please don't take it personally. I apologize. I just can't be in 2 places at once. Thank you.
Part of that is we're not on the official schedule of all the committees, the standing committees, so we try and plug in holes where there might not be a committee hearing.
That's okay.
Other committee hearings, so that's why we're here today, this morning. All right. Anybody else want to leave? No? Okay. All right.
If there's no objection, Chair, I don't mind.
Okay, great.
Alrighty. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. Thank you for having us. I'm Sydney Hart. I'm the Legislative Liaison for the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy. And I apologize, Mr. Chairman. We have another staffer that is joining us this morning. So wanted to introduce Assistant Division Director with our Water Resources Division, Chris Alexander. I have Alyssa Sarver here on my left, who's our Certification Specialist, and then Stephen Ike all the way on the end, who is our Engineering Specialist. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a quick outline of just what to expect from us, and then I know you all will likely have some questions at the end. And so we'll kind of start by outlining the current Part 41 program and give an overview there. And then we'll move on to the proposed rules and give an overview of, that process, what you can expect to see change should the rules go into effect. And then we'll touch a little bit on the stakeholder work group and the engagement that happened on that end. And then we'll close it out and offer our attention for any questions. So if that's all right with you, we'll go ahead and get started. Alrighty, Stephen, I'll have you kick us off, and I'll have you click that red button right there and give us an overview of Part 41.
All right, good morning. So the language of Part 41 identifies the requirements for sewerage systems, which includes your sewer pipes, your pumps, and wastewater treatment facilities. And though people utilize sewer systems every day, Part 41 really only applies to the owners of those sewer systems, which is generally municipalities. So that's where a lot of these rules will be impacting. This part can kind of be summarized in 3 segments. So the first is we do technical evaluations for sewage systems that are going to be constructed. And if the proposed designs will meet the standards, then we would issue a permit for that project to be constructed. And this is how we ensure that any sewer systems that are constructed meet the requirements and will be protective of public health once they're put into service. Secondly, Part 41 requires the proper operation and maintenance of sewage systems to ensure that you're protecting public health by having it operate in the way that it's intended to operate. So this is important for making sure that through the entire life of that system, which sometimes goes beyond its planned life, it is being operated and maintained to protect public health. And third, this part provides classification and licensing requirements for sewerage systems. And this is important because we want to make sure that the people that are operating, maintaining, and keeping an eye on these systems have an adequate knowledge body in order to be able to do that effectively. So basically, we want to make sure that the right system is built, that it's being maintained, and it has the right people to operate it to make sure that the public health is protected. So one of the things that the proposed rules are going to change, I'm going to just kind of summarize as in a broad way, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. But the first is some clarifications for requirements for non-municipality owned sewer systems that serve the public, and making sure that those systems have all the same requirements, meet all the same design requirements, and have all of the proper planning and assets to be able to maintain it through the life of that system, which can require asset management planning, the creation of escrow to put money aside for future repairs, and things of that nature. There's also some clarifications to general definitions that are in this set of rules, specifically for identifying what a public system is, which is not currently clearly defined, but also some revisions to how you can modify an approved construction plan when you have on-the-ground things that require it. It also creates a collection system classification and licensing requirement for operators of these collection systems, and a creation of a retention treatment basin classification, which is for wet weather facilities, and the associated licensing requirements for operators of those systems. And then there's some additional clarifications regarding enforcement as well in the language.
Thanks, Stephen. So I can talk a little bit more about how we developed the rules that we've proposed. The bulk of what we worked on and the larger changes that you'll see in the rule set are the proposed collection system certification requirements and those facility classifications that Stephen just briefly touched on. So in our research, we found that in EPA's Region 5, Michigan is the only state that doesn't have a collection system certification that's either optional or required for those systems. So that's just an interesting point to make as we were kind of researching, how we want to go about this. We also worked with a stakeholder group. We met 18 times between 2020 and 2022, and the stakeholder group was comprised of small municipal systems, large municipal systems, both in the Lower Peninsula and in the Upper Peninsula. And we also had members from different consulting firms that represent some of the work on these collection systems. And so we had some varying folks that came and went between 2020 and now. We've been working on it since 2020, this rule set. So we did meet 18 times virtually, and then we've corresponded via email as we've gone back and forth on trying to come up with the proposed rules and taking their thoughts into consideration and working through the regulatory impact statement and the rulemaking package as it has been set forth. So they helped us present these 4 new classifications, the proposed classifications, C4 through C1, C4 being the lowest for systems that serve a lesser population or not as complex, all the way through C1. So when we initially proposed the rules, we were going to base these classifications on the number of connections served within a community. And when we had our public hearing, we received feedback that we took into consideration that said, maybe you folks should instead consider population served, which mirrors how we already classify wastewater treatment facilities under the same rule set. And when we did the rough math, the number of connections that we had proposed equals that same population that was suggested. So the current draft rule set after the public hearing has now incorporated basing classifications for these collection systems within contributing municipalities based on the population served. So that's what those classifications, that's how those are outlined and how a facility would be classified. The operator certification requirements correspond with that classification, and generally, again, mirrors how we do our current wastewater treatment plant classifications. The lower levels tend to just require hands-on experience, and then these are sequential. So it's intended that you would earn, if you're classified as a C1 facility, you would have to earn that C4 first and kind of work your way through the sequence. And the reason why they're set up that way is intended to set the base for being a well-rounded operator. A lot of times our lower level exams focus on safety and maintenance of systems, and then those higher level exams, if you're classified as such, have some more supervisory, a little bit more complex math. And so those are the basis for how those are set up. As we developed all of this, we worked with our larger wastewater membership industry associations, the Michigan Water Environment Association and the Michigan Rural Water Association. They were both involved in conversations that we've had regarding these classifications and certifications, and we've presented at conferences and offered public webinars since 2020, 2021 to discuss these proposed changes. And I think the last thing I'll add here is one of the main reasons why we see this as a positive is that within the collection systems and in these contributing municipalities, we have staff like your Department of Public Works staff who don't currently have a mechanism to become certified for the work they're doing on sewer systems. And so that was a positive, and one of the reasons why we wanted to propose this is to allow for industry professionals that don't work as drinking water operators or don't work as wastewater operators, or if they do that work, they also do the sewer system work and don't currently have a way to earn a certification for that. So that was a lot of what we had heard when we worked with the stakeholder group, and that's part of our reasoning for proposing this as well.
So I think that kind of covers our brief overview of the program, some of the changes that we're looking for in the proposed rule package. And so I want to open it up to questions because I know when I first sat down with the team and is like listening to Part 41 and all that this entails, I had questions myself. It's a very complicated and convoluted process. And so want to make sure any unaddressed questions that you all have, we can make sure to address those today.
Senator Tice, before you leave, do you have any questions yet?
All right. Discuss, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, questions? Anybody down there yet? Yeah? Rep. Johnson, or no?
Yes.
Okay,
You guys have
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When making the rule set, did you consider where the public sewer starts with the privately owned sewer systems?
So as part of that, the definition of what is a public and private sewer is more clearly clarified. So this language should make that clearer. And as part of our review process for privately owned systems, it does involve statements from the local municipality in which that privately owned system is located, that either if that system has issues and the organization that owns it is not maintaining it, that the municipality could either take it over and perform that work, or that they have said that they will not, and that's putting a higher level of burden on what the owner of that system has to have in reserve in order to prepare for future eventual maintenance that is required on that system. So the rules, the proposed rule changes will help to kind of clarify and codify those requirements and a clear delineation between the owners and responsibilities.
And a second question, thank you. Can you give an example of like some incidences where you saw the need for this new set of rules because there were significant problems? Like what brought this about? What are we solving?
Sure. What we are trying to address, we are having issues with excessive precipitation events, those events where we have excessive, 1, 2, 3 inches of rain in an hour. You may be familiar with basement backups and some flooding issues. So we've been hearing a lot of problems, and we've been trying to work on addressing those issues with basement backup, sewage, literally raw sewage in people's basements. So that's in response to some intense storms that we've been seeing in our urban areas.
Rip Farhat.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to ask a question here. So in 2021, there was a massive storm, as many of you may know, that kind of ravaged, especially through southeast Michigan, in my district of Dearborn and Detroit, where we had upwards of 16 to 20,000 homes that were devastated because of sewage backup that you just referenced. That was a devastating few weeks. I think some families are still recovering. They haven't been able to fully reinvest in their homes as a result of that. And so, just to make sure I'm hearing you correctly, this rule set before us today is taking steps towards addressing the chronic issues that we're seeing that are causing that. Is that what this rule set is aiming to do?
So, yes, the collection system permit. So for the contributing municipality, for example, those pipes that deliver wastewater to treatment plants. So that's what we're looking at here, are those pipes and that conveyance. What we have found is that if it's not maintained, inspected, then we do have infrastructure issues, as you might certainly know from your district. Yeah. And when we have those situations, we do end up with problems, flooding and sewage and basement backups. So we have been actively working on trying to address those concerns across the board, across the state, especially in Southeast Michigan.
And I know this is the rule set here, but this is more of a broader question around the approach Eagle's taking. Well, with this rule set, obviously there's some changes into how that's being managed that you folks are asking communities to take part in. How is Eagle supporting communities in making these transitions or adopting to this rule set? Is there revolving funds that are available? How is Eagle supporting these communities through this? I don't know it's adjacent to the rule set, but I'm just curious.
There are state revolving funds available. As far as their eligibility, I think we would certainly look into SRF availability to help municipalities implement their wastewater needs as we have over the years. So we've been trying to take a very active role in helping to address the problem. In our Southeast Michigan district office, Stephen and his supervisor are directly involved in those meetings with the municipalities and the utilities. So we're fully supportive.
Thank you.
And I'll just add to that, Representative, in sitting in budget committee and, seeing the need for SRF, there's a much larger application pool than there are available funds. And so that is why we continue to bring forward to you all the ask for additional funding for water infrastructure, because there is a critical gap, in the billions of dollars of what we're seeing needs from communities and what we're able to provide on the state level in terms of resources and support. But yes, the state revolving fund is an opportunity that's available to local units of government to apply for either drinking water or clean water grants and loans, primarily loans, but there has been principal forgiveness in the past with all of the ARPA dollars that came through. And so, we've really tried to stretch that as far as we can go, because we want to see these investments made. We want to see maintenance taken care of, and however we can be supportive in that approach, I think, that is our mission. So.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So if you get the additional funding that you just mentioned that you're requesting or going to request, how will you prioritize which communities get the funds first? As we know, we never seem to have enough for everybody at the same year.
Yeah, so what I'll say is, so this does not come with an additional request at this time, right? There's no additional request from Eagle for funding outside of the governor's recommendation. I do know the House proposed some additional funding for the revolving fund for water infrastructure, and so we obviously appreciate that. As far as where we go from here and how we utilize those funds and how we kind of score the criteria for that. So we do every 3 years have an overburden criteria determination. So we go and revisit what those criteria look like, and we do that with the input of the general public, with stakeholders. And so that is something that is factored into how we calculate who receives projects. But there's also another side of things where we're looking at awarding points for regionalization of systems, right? We have too many systems in some areas where we would like to see more partnership, more collaboration, and so we give points for regionalization. For our drinking water, we give additional points for lead service lines. And so there are investments that we see that there's a direct need for because of public health benefits. And so oftentimes we'll see that criteria reflect that.
Will they need to apply for it through grant process, or you'll automatically?
So
decide?
if I'm remembering correctly, and forgive me, this is not my purview, we do have an application process, and I believe it starts in November of every year, and they might know, so they might correct me if I'm mischaracterizing the process. And so we see municipalities apply. It's quite a lengthy process because it's forward thinking, so they're looking at future construction years. And so we actually assign staff to assist them with their applications and assist them with working through those to ensure that they have adequate resources, right? Because when we look at some of these smaller rural communities, they don't have as many resources and the accessibility. And so I'd say that's one benefit of the program. But yes, it is something that they apply to. We will frequently notify you all via email when that process opens up, because we want to make sure that it's getting out to your local communities.
Reports?
Yeah, I think Rep. Johnson kind of asked part of my question, but I have a small municipality in my district that, kind of similar to Rep. Fairhot said, excessive amounts of rainflow came in, and then Eagle mandated that they update their entire system, and the funding is lacking severely to do so. Lots of old clay tiles, trying to either fix those via some sort of a masonry approach or through sleeves, and that's been extremely costly to do so. So I guess I have a couple questions. One is, have you guys, what's the process, I guess, being new here? Have you evaluated with these small municipalities previously and helped them kind of develop a plan of upgrading and maintaining? Or is this, in essence, oh, now we realize we're really behind and you need to update all of this, and it kind of an unfunded mandate to do so, I guess. What's the history here?
And Stephen, I don't know if you'll be able to speak to, the Part 41 program and how we go out and assist facilities with compliance and, kind of the forward thinking of, what investments need to be made as part of that process. So if you're comfortable, feel free to jump in, and if you're not, I'm happy to, kind of maybe redirect, and then we can circle back. Okay.
I think I can. So at one point, and I forget the year, there was some funding that was set aside for developing asset management planning for communities, and that would be the type of process that would be necessary for a community to know when they need to evaluate their sewers, to determine what repairs need to be done, and to plan out for when that should be replaced. The framework that's being implemented with this rule change, and then following with a CMOM permit, requires that same asset management planning. And that is how you can kind of avoid a lot of these issues where some of the older pipes, older systems start to have leakage, start to have collapses, blockages, damage, because you know it in advance, so you can correct it before it becomes basement backups or street flooding or things of that nature that are a direct public health issue. So it is a little bit that we're behind the ball on that. A lot of these smaller communities might not have been planning 30 years out for when their systems were going to be aging out, and that can cause problems.
Well, and I just noticed, I mean, on here it said you did a public comment period for a month, I guess, in April, and only received 17 written comments. Have you done that before? Did you notify all municipalities, small and large, statewide, that you were doing that for feedback? Because it looks like your stakeholders, I mean, there's several, but by and large, they're from more wealthy or affluent communities. And so where's the involvement from rural Michigan?
I can speak to that a bit. Yeah, we have some representation from our Upper Peninsula, and there was a representative from Chocolate Township, and we received that recommendation from one of our staffers that works up in the Upper Peninsula, and he felt strongly that, his name's Brad Johnson, that Brad would be able to speak thoroughly to communities like his, whether or not they're in the Upper Peninsula or in the Lower Peninsula. And that was also part of the reason why we had some of those consulting firms that had membership on the stakeholder group as well, seeing that they do work in the state with a variety of project sizes or community sizes. So certainly, I think there's always opportunities to improve, but yeah, we attempted to get some of that membership on the stakeholder group, and with operating with the Michigan Water Environment Association and the Rural Water Association as well.
And then, Alyssa, you might be able to speak to this a little bit better, but I know often cases when it comes to like permitting and things, we do gov deliveries, and so is that something that we do for this process as well? And do you know how expansive that reaches? So.
Sure. Yeah. So as I stated earlier, over the years, we've been working on all of this collectively since about 2020, and so through that time, we've offered public webinars, which were shared out to our Eagle public lists, folks that either were subscribed to the water resources list, or I believe we also included all of our wastewater operators in the hopes that they would also, they also are in that industry with the folks that are representative from these smaller communities. All of the operators, small or large. Additionally, we have had posted on our website since the public hearing in April. We've got a link to the documents where all of this lives. And so that's right on our main wastewater operator page. And I have had several conversations and emails with folks that have reached out regarding this rule set when they've asked, where can I access this information? And I either send them straight to the admin rule page, or I also send them a recording of the webinar that we offered in 2023 for further context. And I know a couple of months ago I was also at Bay County talking with their public works group. So we try to get this out there as much as we can, and it is public facing, but yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess adding comment to that, I think if this is something you're planning to implement statewide, then you need to put forth the effort to contact every municipality in the state, no matter where they're at. And to say you had one representative from a rural area, when you look at 20 people here, and I can think of lots of small communities in my district that probably have one or two staff members running the entire show. And so that you're saying that's available, but there's no forward communication, I guess I would challenge you on that lies in the department to get the communication out and to go out and do trainings and work with these people. And I see some of the feedback was that the expectation of the class, the requirements for education are too high and unrealistic for operators to meet. And so putting better effort in there to doing those trainings maybe within the department and ensuring that that's done, whether it's in very low income areas in Detroit or very rural areas or very affluent areas that have a large staff and maybe one person managing this. My last question is, do you think you could provide any more definitions for classification? For example, the definition of connections could be added in part 1 to clarify if this means a sewage system customer.
Yeah, excuse me, that was, asking about connections was when we had initially proposed the draft rules and following the public comment period and public hearing, we then decided to change connections to instead just population served. So the connections no longer need to be defined because we, after public hearing, just took that out and said, okay, when we classify these facilities, let's just base it on the population served within the communities, not number of connections. Yep.
And then just to add to the last comment, I do appreciate the feedback, and like Alyssa said, I think we can always do better about our stakeholder engagement. I will mention, it does sound like, and we can verify, but Gov Delivery typically, like she mentioned, goes out to all wastewater operators, and whether it's smaller municipalities or, bigger systems. And so, I think we can do better about getting out to our local communities, and we do always offer to partner with them and do education. And so if there's a community in your district or any of your districts that, they feel like we're not engaging enough, we're inadequate in our responses, like, please let us know, because it's something that we can try to address.
Representative Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize for missing your presentation, some of your presentation. I had a simultaneous meeting that I had to go back and forth in. But this is a very important topic and conversation. I spent some time in the Keweenaw Peninsula, and I'm wondering your outreach there. The representative mentioned that 20 people were contacted statewide, and I'm concerned how many are in the Upper Peninsula and how many are in the inner cities like Pontiac and Detroit, because representation matters. So it may be in the documentation that I have. If it is, I'll do a deep dive on it. But I just want to highlight a lot of comments my colleague made and how important it is that representation is across the board. Thank you.
Absolutely. I agree. I think, and that's what we've heard from some of our previous stakeholder engagement was, right, we need to make sure we're getting into the Upper Peninsula. We need to make sure we're getting to West Michigan. And so, I think this is a little bit of a smaller scale that we're looking at for our stakeholder engagement. It doesn't fully represent, the work that they've done to get out to communities. And I think if we were to put that into a briefing document, it might be, 15, 20 pages, and I know that's not helpful to you all to see step by step of everything that we're doing on our end. But in future, we can be mindful of making sure to provide additional information on how we go about stakeholder engagement in those memos, just so you can see beyond just the stakeholders that we're engaging in this smaller group in conversation to, what we're doing with these webinars and what we're doing with engagement in local communities and reaching out via Gov Deliveries to notify folks of public comment, because we do want more public comment, right? I think bringing in stakeholders is the only way that our laws, our rules, our permits, they get better. And so we want to make sure that we're receiving public comment from a wide variety of folks. And so I think that's something we can easily commit to today, to bringing back to the team and making sure we do that going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you mentioned consulting firms that you hire to advise. Is that every year we're paying consulting firms? And I'm not saying they're not necessary, but I just wonder, what part of the budget is that paying outside consultants to advise on matters like this?
I apologize, and maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I think the consultants that we were engaging with were representing organizations or communities, so we were not paying them from state funds. Those were representing communities that they've done work with.
In Michigan?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Great. That's great. Thank you.
All right. Is it your belief then that every municipality or anybody that's got a water sewage system has been contacted about these new rules?
You know, I'd love to be able to say definitively yes or no. I think we'd need to go back. You know, there are reasons, right, why a municipality or a wastewater treatment facility might not be on our Gov delivery list, whether they've chosen to opt out. So, you know, I'm going to err on the side of caution and say no. We have not contacted every municipality, but I think we would, you know, have to verify that to give you a definitive answer. But I want to err on the side of caution and say no.
Opt out? A municipality can opt out?
So our Gov delivery system is like a notification system, right? So it's essentially the equivalent of a press release that goes out to a Gov delivery system is essentially just a pool of applicants or a pool of subscribers who want to be notified anytime we're making changes to a permit or to rules or of grant opportunities, things like of that nature. And so if a community decides to opt out of receiving those notifications for whatever reason, right, we typically try to respect that, and so they may not receive those notifications.
So they could operate without knowledge of the new rules?
So, and maybe we can speak to a little bit more on what the, like once the rules would go into effect, how long there's a grace period, how quickly, you know, we kind of do some education on that front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So Chris Alexander, who's with us today, can speak a little bit more to the permitting that would correspond with this. And currently, there's not a permit that exists that would correspond with these certifications. But generally speaking, when there's a permit that's issued to a community, there's usually an operator certification requirement. And that's the part that we're talking about here that's in the rule set. And within the proposed rules, we have a section that addresses restricted licenses or interim licensing for folks to get up to speed. So as I had mentioned earlier, the way that these are proposed, they're sequential in that, let's say you're classified as a C1 facility, that would mean that it's intended that you would have to take the C4, C3, C2, and then C1 exam to become formally certified, which is how it works if you're a Class A wastewater treatment plant operator. We have a 5-year period after a facility is classified that we're proposing whatever municipality would then be able to either opt in to just saying they want a restricted license for a certified operator, meaning if he has X number of years of experience, it's 5 or 10, they can just get their license. And as long as they don't leave that community, they're licensed and they meet that permit requirement. And we have another clause that says if you've got hands-on work experience for 10 years or 5 years of supervision, then you can just take the exam at whatever level it is you may need. Both of those clauses are put in place to ensure that within the first 5 years of a facility being classified, that we're not making someone take the exams from start to finish. There's an opportunity for facilities to meet that requirement. I foresee this as we will do outreach to these communities and say, hey, what staff from your collection system do you want to become certified in this initial period? And we will work with them to meet whatever that, you know, restricted or initial clause is. And then after that, any staff that come through or that don't meet, you know, the hands-on work experience requirement at that time, they would then start to take a test. So that's a snapshot of what some of the help will look like from the certification aspect. Chris, I don't know if you want to speak about the permit part.
Sure. From the permitting side of things, which is separate from this process, a permit would require public notice and any permit, a new permit, stakeholder involvement. There would certainly be conversations with those that would be impacted. And so during that process, we would meet, we would talk with people who would be impacted by a permit. Whether that's a municipality, we would work with them directly. And in any permit that we issue, there's a required public notice process of at least 30 days. And so then any interested party can provide comments to the department for consideration before a permit is issued. So
Back to my original thought, though, there could be a municipality that makes changes in its system without knowledge of these rules. Is that true? Yay, nay?
So any sewer system modifications are supposed to go through the permitting process of Part 41?
They're supposed to,
Yes.
but there could be municipalities out there that just ignore the rules or have not been notified.
I think that could happen with any situation, right? Not just Part 41 permitting. Right, we do issue violations. We have an enforcement unit for a reason. There are folks who, right, for one reason or another, whether it's they're not aware of the regulation or they simply don't believe in it, and so they choose to ignore it. We see that, for example, in wetlands programming. We see that in drinking water programming. So, it's not specific to Part 41, but yes, that is a possibility. And in that case, we would discuss with the community, probably initiate violation or administrative consent order in those cases, and walk through that process with them to make sure they understand what's needed from them and what their expectation is. And then if they continue to not follow through on their end, that's when we would look at enforcement.
Rep. Wertz.
Yeah, my colleagues and I over here are looking and kind of reevaluating this, and it's just, I guess, can you explain to us, where's the large cities as well that essentially when we look at this, other than the one in the UP, it looks like the only representation was from here to the east side of the state. Where's Flint? Where's Saginaw? Grand Rapids? Port Huron, Benton Harbor, Petoskey, Pontiac. I mean, we start going down this list. These are major cities who talk about water issues. I think the whole country knows Flint is front and center. And so did we get any input from the city of Flint?
We didn't get any input from Flint or those cities that you folks have mentioned. I can tell you that Greg Tatara, who is listed on that stakeholder group, he was kind of our lead person, along with Michelle LaRose. And Greg specifically is a member of the Collection System Committee on the Michigan Water Environment Association. And so it's been my understanding that all these years that we've been working with them, and with Greg in particular, he has taken back all of these changes back to the Michigan Water Environment Association committee that they have, which represents Ann Arbor. I think Pontiac was on the call the other day, Saginaw. I was just on a call with them the other day. And so it's been my understanding that Greg's kind of the person that's like fielding this discussion for that greater group. And they've been aware for the past 5 years that we've been working on this through him. That's at least been my understanding.
And what I'll say about the stakeholder list is, right, I think, we could definitely add names to the list. That's always a possibility. But there's also a point of the size of the stakeholder group no longer becomes conducive for conversation, right? And so that's often why you'll see us go after folks that are members of coalitions who represent a number of larger cities, or members of coalitions who represent, a wide variety, or consultants who represent a number of small communities. And so trying to get a wide breadth, or casting a net of folks that we recognize will be under that umbrella, while still maintaining a smaller group to ensure that communication is responsive, we're able to address comments received in a timely manner, and have meaningful conversation, to where that may be lost as the group grows larger and larger, to make sure that we're incorporating, say, a quota of small communities, large communities, medium-sized communities, communities with complex systems, communities with, what I mean? It starts to expand pretty significantly, and it's like, where do we draw the line?
Well, I think the thing is, when we look at a map and we literally look at, this is where you got stakeholders right here, and then we have the whole rest of the state, there should have been better participation. And I've sat in some of those meetings you're talking about. It's hard to even know when they meet. They say that they're including people statewide. There was a water issue in my district. It was hidden pages within the department. It's not broadcast or communicated as to when the meetings are. They used to be kept online. I've heard they're only online for a while now. I'm not sure. I don't know about the situation, that committee you're discussing. But again, I think it's imperative that when you're going to make changes and you're going to make requirements in education, I mean, how are we implementing that? How are we going to get the people trained to do that? And you've taken a sliver of a community right in this area, aside from one person in the UP, to base this rule set on. I think you need to reevaluate and get a broader scope, and especially people who live along major parts of water in the state.
If we could maybe speak to, I know I kind of keep hearing us come back to the certification requirements and the education requirements. And I know, predominantly a lot of the comments that we received are focused in Southeast Michigan. And so, I do see like a lot of the stakeholders are from certain parts of the state. And so I can understand why there's concern about the lack of engagement across the state. Is it possible for us to address what we heard from some of those more rural communities, Northern Michigan, and why it doesn't seem that their comments are echoing that same sentiment that we're seeing in Southeastern Michigan of concerns about finding operators that meet those requirements?
Yeah. So we had this conversation several times regarding requirements, and I have it a lot with our wastewater operators because of the existing rules under Part 41 for like Class A and Class B wastewater treatment plants. At the Class A level, it's written to require a 4-year degree plus 4 years of work experience. Luckily for us, and those rules were made in the late 70s, luckily for us, there's a sub-rule that exists under all of the requirements that says the department may substitute education and experience for any of the set forth rules. So in order for us to have our current operators today at wastewater treatment plants, the Class A and B plants, I'm just for those, we have a municipal board of certification that is also outlined in the rule set that we must coordinate with, and we meet with them 4 times a year, and we have a board policy that's been in existence for over 20, 30 years. And they helped the department develop these alternatives to education. And so at first glance, yeah, it looks scary as far as we're asking folks to get college education and they may have just graduated high school and then started working at the DPW. Absolutely, I recognize that. Those are the folks that I work with every day that are operators. But we're saying, okay, we already have a policy in place that allows operators to earn a Class A and Class B certification by means of alternate pathway, which is, for example, California State Sacramento has a whole wastewater certification booklet and really good coursework that a lot of our training partners base their training off, and a lot of folks around the country do. We approve those courses that are online and correspondence classes, and we approve those as like a college course that anyone can access, and they earn credits. And so we've developed this policy. The same thing will be true for these Class C1 and C2 certifications, where we will develop with our board what would be an appropriate alternative to education, where we still have folks earning some background in collection systems, supervisory, right? Like there's engineering, science, and admin are the three areas that we look at. And so we've already spoken with our board to say, hey, can we develop this alternative for the collection systems? And the answer is absolutely, we'll do that. We'll utilize the sub-rule. And when we went back to modifying the rules, we took that into consideration and to ensure that the language that's currently set forth allows us to use that sub-rule seamlessly.
And one thing I'll add, and thank you for bringing up collection systems because that helps round out to my point really quickly. A lot of the time why we're maybe not seeing like these larger cities, so Flint, I don't know specifically about Pontiac, so I can double check, but some of these larger cities have their own wastewater treatment facilities. And so we're not we're not hearing as much feedback from them as we would from these collection systems that are like typically smaller communities that are feeding into a wastewater treatment facility. And so, from my understanding, and these folks here have a much better understanding, so they can correct me, as you know, the wastewater treatment facilities themselves have had pretty positive reactions to the rule set. It's some of the smaller like collection system communities that we're, you know, trying to make sure we can make the rubber meet the road with. And so that's where we might not see as much representation from the water systems themselves, because we're actively trying to, you know, they seem pretty happy with where things are at. I don't want to speak for them, but that's been my impression. And so it's really just trying to figure out how we can work with these smaller collection systems to make sure there's a level of accountability while also, you know, working out the concerns that they have. So that's been my experience while learning what this process has looked like.
Rep. Carter.
Thank you. I guess my concern would be making sure that even the communities that are not plugged into you are getting the information from you, okay? Because of my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, when it's all said and done, the taxpayer is going to be absorbing the cost, okay? So we need to make sure that these communities are educated to the best of our ability, even the ones that opt out. They need to know that this is the rule if this is going to be the rule.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And one thing I'll note, and you know, maybe these folks can fill in the gaps a little bit, is you know, we're required to do an impact statement for financial impact to communities as we evaluate rule proposal processes. And so that's something that was taken under consideration for this proposal. And Alyssa might be able to speak to it a little bit more, but with the associated rules, there are no specified costs. And so, you know, there will be likely down the road with the CMOM permit associated costs there, and I'll have you speak a little bit more to that process. But for the rule package itself, the communities are not going to be expected to encumber like a financial responsibility. So, or Chris, whoever feels most comfortable with that.
Yes, so I think I do want to echo what Sydney mentioned about public noticing, public participation and involvement. And we agree that those who are impacted by the work that we do and the permits that we issue, they do need to be involved. And we do reach out through webinars and those, you know, when you get another email, people tend to delete them. We try to make them aware. Please read. Because there are important changes coming. We work with member organizations, and we do appear at conferences where operators and municipalities, maybe their administrators conference or the operators conference, where they all are present, and we will show them, hey, these changes, these are what we're talking about, here's what you can expect. And so we can always do better. So if you have ideas, we're open to them. But communication is our number one way to get the word out. As far as costs and permits, depending on the type of permit, you know, we've talked about this contributing municipality permit, and I just want to make sure that we're understanding the contributing municipality. That is a municipality that doesn't have a wastewater treatment plant themselves. They have pipes, they have contracts to send sewage and wastewater to a different wastewater treatment plant. So they are a contributing municipality. And so we have about 500 of those systems that don't have any official oversight. And that's the problems that I mentioned earlier when you have to ask a good question, what problem are we trying to solve? So when we look at flooding and basement backups and things, those are the problems. They are real. Those impact people directly. And so what we're trying to do is put a system in place to look at that infrastructure to make sure that it's inventoried and that it's maintained. And so clay pipes are 100 years old, so we know that they fail. And so we know that they can cause sinkholes, they cause those backups, they cause a lot of problems with infrastructure. So the permitting process itself, say if it's a general permit, then there's a $75 application fee. And then I think I'd have to double check, a $150 annual fee. So there's those sorts of costs. That's just the permit itself, of course. Then there's the actual work that they would have to do to inventory their system and evaluate does it need work, and that sort of thing. So when we talk about, you might hear us talk about infrastructure and maintaining our infrastructure, be it roads or bridges, or those pipes that are under the roads that are very, very old. And Stephen mentioned that life, that asset life. Those are the things that we're looking at to try to protect for the next 20 or 30 years. So hopefully that helps answer the questions.
And if we could just, maybe we could just clarify, right, the rulemaking, it would come first, and then we would likely need to go through some additional stakeholder engagement before we issue the CMOM permit that Chris described. So I just want to clarify, they are two separate processes. We're not here today asking, to establish a permit. We still have some work to do on our end to ensure that stakeholders feel good about the direction that we're going. And so, that's still an opportunity for us to continue to increase engagement there. So I just want to clarify here for the rules today. The permit's likely to follow, and if there's interest from the committee, we can always come back in and kind of discuss that. So,
How many contributing or principal systems are going to be in Michigan are affected by this new set of rules? How many are there?
About 500.
500?
Mm-hmm.
And how many have you notified?
Do you want to speak to notification?
yeah, I think kind of what we covered earlier, right, we do the gov delivery system. That's a notification out to the water operators, wastewater operators.
The principals.
pardon?
The principals.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, if the rules were to, be instated, that's when we would need to make sure we do additional engagement, right? We need to make sure we're sending out gov deliveries. I think we've mentioned, right, webinars, engagement on our local district level. And so that's where we'd start to see even more engagement after the rulemaking process is concluded, right? Just because, we do a lot of work on the front end for rulemaking, but the implementation of the rules themselves still is a very lengthy process and requires a lot of engagement with our stakeholders. And so that's where I think your question comes in, is we would have to continue those conversations with folks to make sure that they're aware of the rule changes.
Yeah. Well, most rule changes have the effect of law, which demands 100% notice.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's where you have to end up.
Yeah, and that's where I wanted to make sure, like I said, I don't have our gov delivery list in front of me, so I wouldn't be able to confirm every municipality, but I think that's something that our team would ensure is happening when something like this happens.
Can you
So,
get us that list?
I'm sure we could.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why we couldn't, so I'll see what I
Let's
can
send
pull.
it to the members.
Sure.
I have a question on the escrow. Does a contributor or a principal system both have to have escrows?
So the generation of an escrow is generally for when it's a privately owned utility, because the municipality, like a municipality-run system, is expected to have kind of a continuous existence, whereas sometimes, like if you have an LLC that owns and operates a condo association or something like that, if that no longer exists, if it falls apart or if it's not being maintained, we wanted to have an escrow account that is tied to that specific maintenance and replacement, so that the sewer systems that are owned by that entity will still be maintained whether or not that entity has representation or continues to exist.
So what happens if they cannot establish an escrow?
It would be a requirement for the issuance of a permit, so they would not be able to construct until they've established an escrow.
I'm
which would-
talking about an existing facility looking forward on maintenance. And they don't have an escrow now. What happens?
So all of, again, this is mostly for the private systems,
Right.
but this was something that our program was requiring, even though it wasn't explicitly identified in the rules, based on one of our policies, and that's been in place for a long time. I don't know exactly how long myself, but so all of these privately owned systems that have been constructed and permitted should have some sort of financial mechanism to provide that maintenance over the course of the life of that system.
And if they don't?
That's when we would seek to work with them to either establish that or perhaps have to head toward enforcement on that entity if they are not maintaining their system. But we might not know that until they start to have issues where if they have sewer collapses or overflows or basement backups, that's when we would be alerted to it and could then pursue further action.
But, okay, let's say they had an episode, it'd have to be fixed immediately, and they don't have an escrow. What happens?
That is a very good question, and I think that would be dependent on case by case. If they don't have an escrow, then we might have to work with the owners, so the individual homeowners and other things, to make sure that they are tied to the organization that owns that sewer and that it's being properly maintained. I think we'd have to probably seek some sort of enforcement.
Do you know how many systems are out there without escrows?
Offhand, I do not. Generally, we don't have as many privately owned systems as we do municipality-owned systems. That's where a bulk of our systems are municipality-owned.
Okay. Did these new rules affect any of the combined sewage overflow rules?
Not directly.
No.
The reason I say that is some of the contributing municipalities that would be eventually receiving a CMOM permit may be part of a regional system that does have combined sewers downstream of them, which means that part of the reason that we would want them to have a tight system that doesn't have a lot of extra flow in or a lot of rain flow that comes in is because it might affect the downstream from having CSOs. So if you can eliminate the water you don't have to treat, the rainwater, from getting into the system, then it doesn't have to go out as combined sewage downstream.
Yeah, that's a good point. How would this affect Oakland, Macomb, and Wayne? Since that, I believe the point you just made about rainwater coming into their systems.
It would permit the communities to be more proactive in coordinating amongst themselves for trying to address a regional issue when it comes to CSOs. And that's something that because I'm from the Southeast District, that's something that we are working toward with or without this rules. Like CSO correction is completely separate and is going to have to be addressed. But the interactions between the contributing municipalities, because they don't have a direct permit, can sometimes be more difficult if they are not trying to be proactive or be part of a regional solution.
Are you involved with the Macomb, Oakland, Wayne situation?
I have compliance for the Great Lakes Water Authority wastewater treatment plant, which does take sewage from Wayne County, Oakland County, and Macomb County. So I'm fairly involved in overall, and one of the things that I know we're trying to achieve, which is difficult across 3 counties, is developing a regional operations plan. Some of the elements of this would help to support that in the future, because you'd have the right people with permits and requirements that we could then use to look at the whole region and give them that flexibility to operate differently based on where rain falls in the region. So
would you agree that the status quo for those 3 counties is unacceptable?
I'll take that one,
Hi.
Mr. Chairman. Hello. I think we recognize that there are deficiencies in the system, right? SSOs still exist. We recognize that we need to work to address CSO. So I think we recognize that there are still issues that need to be overcome. And so that's why we have staff like Stephen in the district working with these communities to see how, one, we can find funding available to address some of these concerns, and 2, just think about like longevity and planning and how, we can move we would love to see more regionalized systems across the state, but particularly in Southeast Michigan, right, the population is so dense, you know, we do see these problems arise, and so trying to figure out how we can address those, you know, it's going to be, I think, a multi-step process. So, and I know you're
Sooner
very
is
familiar
better.
with these.
4
Yes,
million
sooner
people
the
in that
better.
area. All right, and then I had 2 questions from SEMCOG that you
Yes,
got a
absolutely.
chance to review. They're asking, well, I'll just read what we've got here. Would Eagle consider pausing the rulemaking process in order to allow time for Eagle staff and affected stakeholders and local agencies to have further discussions regarding the proposed rules, the alignment with any future permit program, and the legal basis for creating a potential new permit that has been in question since 2021?
Yeah, so I'll start the question, and then I'm sure folks might jump in and have comments to clean up after me. But, you know, I don't think at this time we're willing to pause rulemaking, right? This has been a fairly lengthy process as it is. You know, we started this in 2020, and so it's been over the course of 5 years, which in my personal experience is quite longer than what I've seen other rulemaking processes take. And so, you know, I think for that reason, we would like to continue with the process. What, you know, I have expressed and what our team is committed is, you know, like we said today, this rule package before you is the rule package. There is the CMOM permit that we are considering. That's where we can make commitments prior to establishing any permit there, continuing those stakeholder engagement conversations. You know, we have had initial conversations over the years on that permit, willing to continue to have those conversations set aside from the rulemaking process. And I can be corrected if I'm wrong, but the rules do not automatically mean that these contributing systems or these collection systems have to comply with, right, a permit that doesn't exist. And so we would need that adjoining permit to set certain requirements up. And so we think that the rules kind of establish like this foundation that can be built upon by the permit. And so we feel like it, you know, we're comfortable moving forward with the rulemaking process, establishing that foundation, continuing stakeholder engagement, and then working towards a permit that's appropriate, that maybe has some compromises and concessions to make sure that municipalities can meet some of those requirements.
So the answer to that question is no.
Yep. The short answer, yes, no.
Okay.
It is no.
Now, second question. After the comments of opposition were received, was the regulatory impact statement updated to include the comments that said that many more local agencies would be affected than the original estimate?
Yeah, and I know Alyssa has, you know, worked a little bit more closely with the RIS, and so I'll let her speak to that, but I think it kind of goes into the last question a little bit, and why I was setting the stage was, you know, there's a separation between the rulemaking process and the permit process, and the costs are associated with the permit themselves, not necessarily the rules. So Alyssa, if you want to maybe just dive into that a little bit more for clarification.
Sure. We did not reevaluate the regulatory impact statement following the public hearing, but we did, you know, instead take into consideration the comments we received to ensure that we were updating the draft rules or modifying them based on those comments, which again, as you've seen, most of the comments regarded those higher level classifications for the certification requirements. And so we revised that language to ensure that we can utilize that sub rule as I said earlier. For costs associated with the rules and the certification requirements, there's a separate law that has our operator fees in it. So it would require a legislative act to even include fees for applications and examinations for these proposed rules. So the rules themselves, there's no application fee associated with them. We would have to have a legislative act for that. And we can deduce that because we're proposing renewal requirements for these certifications, once a person becomes certified, they'd be certified for 3 years and have to renew with continuing education every 3 years. Those classes are not free, and we know that. And it can be the operator's responsibility to pay for those courses, or oftentimes the municipality may pay for that coursework for them and they get reimbursed, and that was included in the regulatory impact statement. We estimated, the cost of a course from, let's say, Michigan Water Environment Association or the Michigan Rural Water Association, two of our leaders in offering training. And we did estimate how much it might cost to renew a certification based on continuing education. But other than that, there's no prescribed cost or fees in the rule set.
In this rule set, what is your opinion of the opposition? Is it greater than 50%, 60%? How much opposition do you have to these rules?
Really, it's what we received in those letters. The 17 letters that we received were the opposition. And beyond that, as Sydney stated earlier, there's been a lot of support for this around the state from the folks that we've talked to. And I do want to make clear, too, that since 2020, part of my job as the certification specialist is to go to conferences that represent the Michigan Rural Water Association, which are drinking water operators in small communities and wastewater operators. And I've been telling them, too, hey, this is coming. Please make sure you guys, ask me questions, come to me. And so people have been excited about the opportunity to have another certification that represents this part of work that does not currently have really a leg to stand on in the industry. So we've not had truly a ton of opposition that we've heard up to this point. It's the letters we've received.
So your opinion is that most people would be in favor of this?
Yeah, I mean, right, it's difficult to quantify like a percentage of opposition versus support because, right, we're seeing folks reach out because they're opposed. Same thing with, I would say, a law, for example, like legislation, we're more likely to see folks come out in opposition because it impacts their industry or because they want changes rather than folks coming out in support or that's been my personal experience. And so I would say that's kind of very much in line with what we see in the rulemaking process is folks that want to be heard because they have concerns or they have requested changes is typically who's going to reach out to us. And then in more casual or informal conversation, that's when we hear like the more supportive comments like, oh, we didn't weigh in because we are feeling really good about, where this rule set is headed. And so, I think we could speak more to the informal conversations that are probably not documented. But I would leave that to other folks to be able to speak for themselves. The contributing communities, the wastewater treatment facilities, those folks, I think would be able to kind of speak to their experiences with this.
We're running out of time. Any last questions? No, everybody all set? Everybody all set? Well, thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
You don't have a final statement, do you?
No.
Your famous last words?
No famous last words. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the hard questions. Happy to follow up. We'll make sure to get the gov delivery.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're going to get us some information on that.
Yes, absolutely. And if there are any additional questions or there's a municipality that you're hearing from that would like to sit down, please let us know, and we're happy to coordinate that.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming in. All right. Let's see. Do we have any cards? None?
No cards.
No cards. Okay.
Just out of here.
Yeah.
We don't have enough people to excuse.
Right. Okay. We just have absent people and we don't have a quorum, so they're just absent. Okay. There being no further business, the meeting is adjourned.